Buongiorno. Guten Tag. Goeiemorgen. It's an honor and a privilege to be your opening keynote speaker with that lovely quote, so thank you. Teşekkür ederim. The great quote from Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, in the plenitude of this great universe, why have we chosen to fall asleep in such a small, dark prison? So this day is about how do we discover the keys to break out of our own prisons? How do we liberate coaching from the coaching closet? How do we make it deliver beyond the individual? So it's an honor to, if you like, set out some of the challenges for the day, which is what I'm going to try and do in the next 45 minutes. And it's amazing how often you go to coaching conferences, and coaching begins with inquiry and questions. And yet coaching conferences start with solutions and tools and methods. So I'm going to reverse that and have the questions at the beginning. But to do that, I would like you to close your eyes, put your books down, put your feet flat on the floor, and move your seat, your bottom right back in the chair so your spine is upright, and close your eyes. And I would like you to take a big in-breath, breathing up from the floor, from the soles of your feet, through your legs, up your spine. Stretch your spine, and feel the breath as you breathe in, coming right out of the top of your head and connecting you with the air and the sky. And then a big exhale, thinking of something that makes you smile and feel expansive. You can breathe out through your mouth, unless you've got a cold like me. And just big out breath. And then once again, I invite you to breathe in. And this time, I'd like you to think of all the people your work serves. To think of the people you train and supervise, your clients, and to gradually build up a montage, a collage of all the stakeholders of your life and your work. To think of your clients' teams. Picture their organizations. Picture the communities where those organizations operate, that support those organizations and are supported by it. The customers of the organizations, the investors, the stakeholders, the employees. And then beyond the human world, to the more than human world, the ecology that supports all those communities and is supported by it. And beyond the local ecology to the air, the earth, the water that keeps all of us alive. And then come back and include your family. Parents, brothers, sisters, children, grandchildren, future family. And with that big collage of all your stakeholders, I'd like you to hold them all in mind, as many as you can, and ask them, what do they need you to do and learn today that at least 100 of your stakeholders will benefit from you having the privilege to be here? What do you need to ask, inquire about, discover step up to for at least 100 of your stakeholders to benefit from you having the privilege of being here? And what question would they like you to ask today? As soon as you've got some kind of answer, I invite you to open your eyes, turn to the person next to you, and ask them, what is it your stakeholders need you to learn and develop today? You've got 2 minutes each way, and if you don't have an answer, get your question in first. Go! I've discovered an important skill is to learn to interrupt people. I know we're taught in coaching you shouldn't interrupt, but it's really important if you break people into buzz groups. If you let people, you need to stop people when they're right in the middle, because that's where the energy is the highest. And it's also, if you let them go on too long, they get attached to their own answers rather than stay with their half questions. Does that make sense? Let's just hear a few of the questions. And Salome, my colleague from Stellenbosch in South Africa, is going to write them up for me. Thank you. By a donkey. So who's got a question that their stakeholders need them to ask? And this is why, oh great, this is where I get my morning exercise. Is this on? No. How do I switch it on?
It is on, I think. That sounds you're on.
Great.
Thank you. My clients ask me, how can we combine technology and coaching and mentoring so that we can reach out to more clients in the world?
Right. So how can technology and AI enable us to reach more people? Great question. What other questions are around? I promise not to answer them. We just need to fill the room with some really good stakeholder questions.
How we as coaches can help sustainability.
What can we do as coaches with the range of influence and impact we have to help sustainability? Great question. Oh, here, good.
What's the ecology of coaching and how can it do good for me and others?
What is the ecology of coaching and how can it
do good for me and for others?
Right, so do you mean the ecology of coaching or the wider ecology or both? Connectivity. How do we ensure that coaching is standing in connectivity with everything around us? Wow, that's a lovely question. Thank you. We'll take 2 more. Right, one here.
What does the changing narrative around mental health in organisations mean for us as coaches and supervisors?
What is the changing narrative around mental health? And what's its implication for coaches and supervisors? I was at a recent conference in Romania, and I found myself talking about mental health. And do you know, for the first time in human history, more young men between 16 and 40 die from suicide than all wars and murder put together, right? So I went on to say, the most likely person to kill you is yourself, so be careful who you go home with. But it is an important issue. How do we address the enormous exponential growth in mental illness? Okay, one last question. Oh, right at the back. Right, here we go.
My question is, how do you raise your visibility or increase the connectivity without losing your essence? Because sometimes with all the new technology, you kind of dilute the contact.
How do we increase the connectivity without losing the essence? Is that our essence, our client's essence, both? The essence of the work? So we might also ask, how do we find the essence in the connectivity? Yes? How do we find the essence not within us, but between us? How do we find the essence of the connectivity? Great, we'll try and weave these questions into the talk. Thank you very much. So these are some of the things we can also carry through the day. So I want to say, you know, underneath this suit, this shirt, as I said in a talk last week, there is a T-shirt which says, "I am a recycled teenager." A revolutionary, and I'm in love with Greta Thunberg. Because I think we need to step up to the fact that we need a revolution in human consciousness, and coaching has an important role to play in that revolution. I think, you see, I've had the privilege of watching EMCC grow since 1992. I think, David, I met you around that time, yes? In fact, David, I wasn't sure whether it's a compliment or not. We had dinner about 6 months ago, and he leant over the table and he said, "Peter, I think you and I are the last two old farts standing who were around at the beginning of coaching and who are still working." I said, "Well, I don't know what that makes us, David. But why am I still working, I will talk about." But you see, I think in that period, the last 40 years, we've achieved a lot. We've taken leadership development out of the classroom, we've personalized it, we've helped leaders and managers have far better emotional intelligence and relational skills than they had when I was a leader and a manager. We've taken coaching from being outsourced difficult conversations, and we've trained managers to do their own difficult conversations. We developed internal coaching communities, team coaching, supervision. It's been an extraordinary journey. You know, I think any new industry or profession that's had the meteoric rise of coaching will be very proud of what it's achieved. However, I would want to say to you, in the words of Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. I do not think that what we've developed that's made us successful in the last 40 years is what's needed for the mid-21st century. I had three, and I apologize to a couple of people who were with me last week who've heard some of this before, but there's some new stuff coming, so stay awake. Oh, that's interesting. The slide. Oh, there we go. I'm going to go to this. 3 wake-ups. The first was I was at a conference at Henley, 2009. We just had the economic crisis, the banking crisis, or as I prefer to call it, the wake-up call that we'd reached the limits of growth. And I realized that Lehman Brothers, Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays, had all spent a fortune on executive coaching. And I asked the question, what were the coaches doing while the banks were burning? You know the answer I got? Somebody put their hand up at the back. He said, it's obvious what they were doing. I said, tell me. He said, they were sending their invoices in very quickly to make sure they got paid. And people started to laugh. And I started to laugh, then I gulped. I thought, what does that say about our profession? We know that many people knew that not only those organizations, but Enron and BP, who also employed a lot of coaches, were driving off a cliff, but didn't do anything. And I started, my colleague Margaret Heffernan wrote a great book called Willful Blindness. What is the role of coaching to help people beyond willful blindness? Second one was when I was with Salome. We were in Cape Town. I was working with Salome. We were helping that area look at how they created a coaching culture in the government and in the region. We had people from all over the region in the room, and we had frontline managers, middle managers, senior leaders, yes. And the people in the government were presenting their coaching culture, creating a coaching culture strategy. And some of you know I've written a book about that. And there was a lovely moment I shall never forget. A young, frontline, tall, black manager stood up, and he said, it sounds like to me that the people with the big offices, the big cars, the big paychecks now get the big coaches. He then said, it sounds like coaching is very expensive personal development for the already highly privileged. And you know, that hit me in the gut. Do you remember that, Salome? It hit me in the gut. I thought, is that what I'm spending my life doing? very expensive personal development for the already highly privileged. And is that what I want to be spending my life doing? And indeed, the book that I've just finished with Eve Turner, which is coming out in about 3 weeks, and there's some leaflets with a discount code on every table. That whole book is trying to answer the question, how do we get coaching beyond expensive personal development for the already highly privileged? The third wake-up call, and I think coaching has been extraordinarily slow to wake up to this one, and I include myself in that. You know, somebody who has unexcusable amounts of global air miles. Yes, I may have planted lots of trees, which I have done, but not nearly enough to cover my carbon debt. Zoe Cohen, earlier this year, some of you know Zoe, asked where were all the coaches when the planet warmed by 3 degrees? Yeah, at the moment, if you look at that from the BBC climate tracker, even on the current pledges of governments, which they are not delivering on, we're going to hit 3 degrees global warming. You may have seen the report last night. Yes? And it's interesting, based on current practice, will be more than 3, and based on rising trends, we'll hit over 4.5. I don't know if you've looked at what 4.5 means, but it probably means most mammalian extinction, including human beings, right? And I asked just recently, there was a big ICF conference in Prague, I said, how many sessions are there that are mentioning the ecology? There was not one. Yeah. And then I was talking to a whole group of coaches, and they said, oh, I had this last week, but it's not our, you're bringing campaigns in. As coaches, we should not bring in our agenda, right? It's not our job to bring the ecology into the coaching room. You know what I said? I said, do your clients breathe? Do they eat? Well, then it's in the room. Our job is not to bring it into the room, but to wake up to the fact that it is in us. BPS now talk about we are all, in some form, consciously or unconsciously, suffering from eco-anxiety. Yes, it's around us, it's part of us. We think of the ecology as something out there, and the climate crisis about something in the future. But they're inside us, they're around us, they're between us. So that leads to some really important questions, like these ones. What is it we need to do? And I think that's part of the theme of this conference today. And at the same time as we've got all of that, we've got disruptors. It was Peter Diamandis from Singularity University who said, today you've got to choose choices. Either disrupt your own work or wait to be disrupted. And I think too often we as coaches are waiting to be disruptive. And by the way, Bill Gates said, when we look at that list of how successful we've been, Bill Gates said, success is a lousy teacher. It makes you complacent. It makes you attached to what you've already been doing rather than to wake up to tomorrow's game. But we've got many challenges and disruptions. I did this research for Henley on tomorrow's leadership and the necessary revolution in today's leadership development, where we interviewed people around the world. And many of the millennial future leaders we interviewed said, why would I wait a month to get an appointment with a coach? I want the answer now. I want the help now. Yeah? So why don't I just, go on to WhatsApp or one of the others and just put something out? I get lots of help overnight or instantaneously. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of the other thing came from the research was every large organization we interviewed said the next 10 years will be employing far fewer people. But the number of people we will have to partner with will get greater and greater. You see, I think HR are having to wake up to the fact in 10 years' time, most of your people resources will not be on your payroll or inside your organogram, right? We're having to move from leadership being about leading my people, my team, my function, my organization, to how do I connect across boundaries horizontally, both inside the organization and outside. So I think we need to ask this question. What can coaching uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? And how do we gear up for those needs? Some of you know it's my favorite question. What can you uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? Not that the cloud wants, but the world of tomorrow needs. And I was using this for about 20 years. As some of you know, about 10 years ago, somebody said, well, Peter, what's your answer to that question? I thought, well, that's a good challenge. I had to go away on retreat for 5 days to answer my own question. And at the end of that, I decided that these were the 5 people, and I made a commitment when I was 9 years ago, when I was 60, that I would not do a speech without taking a picture of my grandchildren. Because they're the people who are keeping me working. And not because the people, as the people at Deloitte said, because it's not because I'm subsidizing all their parents' mortgages. Iris, Florence, Nancy, Charlie, and Freddie. They're a bit bigger now, so I must update the picture. Why are they keeping me working? Because I absolutely know that when those little people grow up, inshallah, you know, they get through school and university, God willing, they go out and they take on leadership in the world, they will face more complex and much, much bigger challenges than anything my most privileged generation, probably the most privileged generation that's ever lived in terms of opportunities, has had to face. And I do not think we're doing nearly enough to help the coming generations be prepared for what we are leaving them. And if I lived long enough, just about possible, if the NHS keeps going, and I got to 100, they come to me and they say, look, Grandpa, what were you coaches and leaders doing when you were leaving us this volatile, unpredictable, complex, and challenging and ambiguous world? A world of greater demand, increased expectations, 3 times bigger population than when you were born, right? The population has grown more than 3 times since David Clutterbuck and I were born. Yeah. What were you doing to help us prepare for that one? And I would like to be able to look them in the eye and have an answer. I think the person we're most accountable to now in my work life is my grandchildren's future, not my today's clients. And I won't go into that, but just to say, in terms of the research, it is available. It's on my website. You can download it. We interviewed leaders all around the world. And these are the top 7 challenges that came up. Interesting, every millennial future leader we interviewed put climate change and the climate crisis in their top 3 challenges. Very few CEOs did. And yet, when prompted, they all said, this will change everything. But somehow, I don't know if you know this, we are wired, right, evolutionarily wired, not to be conscious of our own mortality. And that's one of the reasons why we cannot think and include this, because we're wired not to. Yeah. But these were the changes that came out. I learned this new verb, to be Uberized, right? Many, you know, I spoke to this CEO of a very powerful organization. He said, listen, Peter, I wake up terrified every morning. He said, because I know if we stay doing what we're doing today, we're going to be dead in the water in 5 years. But I know if we chase every innovation, we're also going to be dead in the water. How do I have part of my organization disrupting the other part that's earning the money of today? Right? This is the world we're living in. And that means we've moved beyond the need for individualistic, heroic leadership. I know we're being asked in the UK to go out and vote for who we're going to put our faith in as the next heroic leader. But even if we did have a better choice, right, it would be the wrong choice. Because today the world is changing so rapidly and so complexly, you cannot have the only point of integration as the heroic leader. Right? I wrote an article, the heroic leader is dead. No, the heroic CEO is dead, long live the team. Right? We can't have a hub and spoke team where where you have the Prime Minister and the head of the Home Office, the head of the Foreign. We've got to have a team that take collective responsibility for the integration of the whole. Because as one CEO said to me, Peter, you said, I've got lots of coaches who coach my people. I've got lots of consultants who consult to parts of my organization, but that's not where the challenges lie. He said, all my challenges lie in connections. We had 2 questions about connectivity. All my challenges lie in the connections, not in the people or the parts. And yet, in the last 40 years, we've learned a lot about how we coach individual people. Now the challenge is, how do we train coaches to coach the connections, not the people or the parts? And that's not just, he said, not just the connections inside, between people, between teams, between functions, but between us and our myriad of stakeholders that get greater and more complex. So the real challenges lie in this. So I've been saying for a long time, we've got to, if the last 40 years, coaching's made a fantastic contribution from moving leadership from focusing on IQ to focusing on EQ, now we have to move from focusing on IQ to focusing on WeQ, collaborative intelligence, not individual intelligence. And I love this. I was out earlier this year training team coaches in Japan. What I learned from them is they never talk win-win. They always talk win-win-win. We have to work in triangles, not in dyads. Yes? A win for my client, a win for the coaching, but a win for who are we both there in service of. The third win is the most important. I won't go into this because we're short of time. We don't need definitions. You can buy the book after all, so you don't need me to go through that. But I'm going to talk about 6 steps that I think are really important, which we cover in the book. Working in partnership. How do we work systemically? How do we get the multi-stakeholders? I had another lovely question, but I did this questions in Romania, 350 people in the room. Somebody asked the question at the beginning of the talk, how do we get the egos out of the coaching room? So as I'm always provocative, I said, your ego or your clients? She said, oh, both, of course. And by the end of the talk, we discovered an answer. I said, if we fill the room with the voices and needs of the stakeholders, there's less room for egos. But only if we get all the stakeholders' voices into the room. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So, some of you know I wrote this article for Coaching at Work called Cracking the Shell. It's also on my website. You can download it. What they teach you on coach training programs that you have to unlearn to work systemically. Yes? The client is the person opposite me. Yes? I have to be on their agenda and what they want. I've got to leave my experience outside the coaching room. Did you learn some of these when you did your coach training? Well, the third one I always say, I had a problem with leaving your experience outside the room because I could never find the cloakroom big enough to park it. Yeah. Interventions are always questions. My experience, most of the best interventions are not questions. You shouldn't interrupt. Well, I've already broken that one. You should end with an action plan, and coaching is only about personal development. I think these are the myths that we have to break and get beyond, right? And I'll talk a bit about that. So the first one is, for many years, I used to start my coaching by looking at my client. If I can just borrow Anna here, my colleague from Lisbon, who's a great cook. And I would look my clients in the eye and I'd say, what do you want from coaching? What a dumb way to start coaching. Why? I do 2 things when I look you in the eye and ask you that question. First of all, I trigger you to access your left hemisphere neocortex, which is probably the last bit of you that knows the development you need. And secondly, I put Anna back in being at school, being asked a question by a teacher. That's what hypnotically I'm doing. And what happened when you were asked a question by a teacher? What did you do, Ritza? Try to find the best answer. Which was the best answer? The best answer is the one the teacher's already thought of. Yeah? The one that will get you good marks. Other people are like, what happened when teachers ask you a question, Anna?
Well, I feel fear of not...
I go to fear. I freeze. I go blank. That's what we do so often with our clients. Yeah? So what do our clients say? They think, oh, what am I meant to say here? Oh, Ritza, please help me with my relationships and help me communicate better and take better leadership. We get dumb answers. It's the wrong question. It's partly because we're treating that person as our client and us as supplier. Right? So let me just look at that. What are your goals for coaching? How many of your clients know what their coaching development goals are? Right? At the first meeting. It's a dumb question. You know, in my life, if I look back, the most important development I've needed, I've not asked for, I've not known I needed, but life decided. Somebody once said to me, Peter, how did you know you were ready to have children? I said, if I'd asked that question, I still wouldn't have any. Right? Life decided. It was my next lesson. So now, you know, I think we have to change these coaching questions. And by the way, it took me another 10 years. Right? I changed how I started, but I didn't change how I ended. At the end, I used to say, so, Sylviane, what's been helpful about this session and what could be more helpful next time? You know, it took me a long time in much supervision to wake up to the fact that in doing that, I'm arrogantly stepping back into the belief, right, that I've done the coaching, right? And you're the customer, I'm the supplier. You know, I was at this Thinkers 50 with David Marshall Goldsmith's sort of top group of narcissists in the world. And we did try and translate it in the back row into English, didn't we, David? But I was amazed. We had to look at how did we change the awards for 2 years' time, right? And how do we make it more diverse? And after about 10 minutes, I got up on behalf of David and I said, listen, why are all the awards, these global awards for coaches, for the coaches? I said, what about the coachee? They do more than half the work. Yeah. What about the best coaching relationship? Why doesn't that get a prize? Or the best coaching impact group? Right? We're still stuck in individualism. We're still coach-centric. Yeah? So now I don't do any of that. You know, I will always start by saying, Anna, tell me about you. What really matters to you in your life? Who does your work in life serve? How do we bring those into the room? And how do I go shoulder to shoulder with you? Not as my client, but as my partner. And it's the same in supervision. Right? You know, my colleague, Robin Shohat, my good friend, we go back, 43 years, I think was my last count. One of the many things I've learned from Robin was, he said, why do you ask people what client do you want to bring to supervision? He said, I asked them, which client would you least like to bring to supervision? So it's far more fruitful, right? Because then we're focusing on the work, not the neurosis of the supervisee. Yeah. And at the end now, I'll say, so look, I'll start off by saying, who does your work serve? How do we bring their voices? So by the way, if any of you coach in rooms that only have 2 chairs, please go home and put a lot more chairs in your individual coaching room. There should not just be 2 egos in a coaching room, just 2 chairs. How do we get the voices of the stakeholders in from the word go and present in every coaching conversation? How do we end by saying, so I'll end now and I'll say, Anna, if your lovely family were here with us, if your clients were here, your supervisees were here, what would they have valued about the work you and I have done together? Yeah? And what would their challenge be to us? What would your lovely daughters be saying about, we did this on one of our, we did some supervision together. Yeah? What would your daughters be challenging us about what we're not doing? What would your clients be challenging us to look at together? So you see how we've moved from dyadic to triangulated. Yeah, we moved the client from being the person opposite me to my partner's ecosystem. And this question about, how do we find the essence? How do we find the essence? Not just within us, but how do we find our identity and ourself in the work? That's why I've always been worried about work-life balance. Yeah? Because then we make life what we do to recover from work, which is why we continue to make work exhausting. And I said the amount of hours I spend at work, if that's not my life, I'm doing something wrong. Yeah? How do we make the work itself replenish us? Not, we have to go off to supervision, we have to go off to do lots of courses to refuel ourselves with non-renewable energy to go back and get exhausted again. Secondly, how do we listen systemically? How do we not, we've all been very well trained to listen to our clients. I don't think we've been trained enough to listen through our clients. Yes? When an executive turns up, it's not just an individual who turns up in your coaching room. Their team dynamic turns up inside them. Their organizational culture turns up in your coaching room. Their organizational willful blindness turns up in your coaching room. The environment turns up because we think in terms of systems. We are nested in our family, nested in the community, in our team, in the function of the organization, in the business system, in the ecosystem. We think that way. But actually all those systems are also nested in all the systems beneath it. So there's never an individual who turns up. I think it was Krishnamurti who said, we think our own thoughts, we don't, we think our culture's thoughts. So remember, when you're coaching, you're not just coaching an individual, you're shifting a culture. These are three questions that you'll like this, Robbie. One of the supervision calls, people said to me, Peter, you create so many models, I'm now in a model muddle. If I can only think of three things, what should I hold in mind? He said, I can't hold all your complex models. So I said, look, I thought about that for a while, and I said, look, these are three questions to hold in mind, not to ask the client, but to hold in mind as an inquiry into the field. What's the truth that needs to be spoken? What's the shift that needs to be enabled? And what's disconnected that needs connecting? And I'm not asking that about what's disconnected in the client. What's disconnected in me, that's disconnected in our relationship, that's disconnected in you, that's disconnected in your team, that's disconnected. What is rippling up and down the systemic levels that we can attend to? These are questions for the field, not for the individual. In the book, we talk a lot about, how many of you do multi-stakeholder contracting in your coaching? Yeah. So Eve did some great research, Eve Turner, which I helped her with. We published it 2016. We talk about it in the book. What we discovered is so much multi-stakeholder contracting is done very poorly. So if you're my coachee and Nova's your boss, we invite her in and we say, Nova, what does Anna need to? And do you know what I discovered happens? We invite the boss to be patronizing or matronizing. They say, oh, Anna, she needs to learn how to present better. And do you ever get those sorts of comments? Rather than making the stakeholders part of the work. Inviting Nova in, inviting Rita in from another part of the organization and saying, what is it that the organization needs to step up to? What does that require from Anna's team? What does that then require from Anna? And how are you guys going to be part of that transformation that ensures that what we're doing here is going to transform the team and transform the organization? How do we make them part of the network that's doing the work, not part of people giving patronizing comments and locating problems back in Anna? Getting the stakeholders' voice into the room. Some of you know the work I've done on coaching teams and coaching boards. The simplest thing that's had the biggest impact, particularly working with boards, is getting them to bring 3 or 4 extra empty chairs into the boardroom, right? Like on this table. And on this one, I would put a notice on the back saying, our customers, our employees, our investors. And on this one, as we did, do you remember? We had 3 people in Cape Town stepping into the role of the future collective grandchildren of the Western Cape. And we got feedback on the coaching culture strategy from the future grandchildren. And when we have a conflict on the board, right, I say, stop, get out of your chairs. You can do this at any team. Please sit in those chairs and comment on this from the stakeholder's voice. Yeah? How do we invite the stakeholders in at the beginning, the middle, the end? And how do we keep their voices alive throughout it? Oh, and by the way, I said that one about one of the most common things, you know, that happens in supervision. People come along and say, we had a great session. We had an aha moment. They left with an action plan. I said, great. So what's the issue? They say, they didn't follow through. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. It's the same with teams. I discovered that I did research on any of you run off-site away days for teams? Hands up. Yeah. The depressing research is that I did was that if you ask them how much of what they decided on the away day gets put into action, right, the results are somewhere between 0 and 30%. And we have to ask, how do we change that? You see, when we did this, looking at this being a common issue, you know what we next found in supervision? When that happens, the coach blames the client. They weren't courageous enough, right? They weren't committed. Rather than ask the question, what were we doing wrong? When we did that, my colleague Nick Smith, we came up with a simple phrase: if the change does not happen in the room, it ain't going to happen outside the room. How do we move? You see, if we end with an action plan, you know this nice English phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions and action plans. Yeah? Insight and action plans can be helpful, but they are not sufficient. If we end there, we have not done our job. So this is where we have to have fast forward rehearsals. You know, we have to move from tell me about what you're going to do to show me. Right? Your difficult boss, put him on this chair. Show me how you're going to start that next conversation different. Because then we're moving it into embodied. You see, plans happen with the left hemisphere neocortex. Change is always embodied. Right? If we don't move it to embodied learning, we haven't done our job. Fifthly, we have to, you know, the biggest, fastest growing element of coaching is team coaching. But we have to make sure we don't replicate the same problems at the team level. I've written books, and I apologize for this, that talk about how do we create high-performing teams. And I now say I don't believe in high-performing teams. It's a dangerous concept. Why? Because we coach teams to be the best team in their organization, the best team on the block, right? Therefore, we build competition. Or it becomes a place of arrival, which is not helpful, or a tick box exercise. What I'm now talking about is how do we, you see, that the performance of a team does not lie in the team. It lies in the value they co-create with and for all their stakeholders. So rather than talking about high-performing teams, we should talk about teams that continuously co-create value with and for all their stakeholders. It's not a place of arrival, being a great team, right? As Manchester United have just discovered. Right? It's a place of continuous co-creation with all your stakeholders. And what we have to realize is that just coaching the individuals doesn't work. We have to coach, and then we have to make sure that coaching is not just focusing on this belief, which I used to start team coaching by asking, what do you want from team coaching? And you would say, oh, sort out our president for us, right? And I'll go and talk to him and he'll say, oh, get all the others to step up. You know, they're not taking enough responsibility, right? And I get all their interpersonal noise. It's the wrong question. I should have been asking all those years, what is it this team can uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? What can you achieve through collaboration you cannot achieve by working in parallel? That's the important question. So how do we realize that a lot of team coaching is not about the internal relationships, it's about the external relationships? And that's why I developed this model, which is about the 5 important disciplines which we've researched and we've looked at and we've kind of measured. You know, are we clear about why? By the way, the best research, some of the best research on teams is done by Michael West on the NHS, where he shows there is a causative connection between having effective teamwork in hospitals and the mortality rate, right? Good teamwork can save lives. And bad teamwork can lead to people dying more frequently than they need to. But you see, why are we a team is the first important question. If we're not clear about our collective purposes, as Ritza quoted me saying, the blog is still on my website, I wrote it just before my 40th wedding anniversary, right, which was a brave move. Partnerships are not created by partners. I was in the middle of a merger with 2 big finance companies, as well as my wedding anniversary. I was interested in the connection between the two, right? And they said, we want to create a culture that is the best of both. These 2 being very different financial organizations. And I said, I wouldn't start there. If you start with that question, you will spend 2 years arguing about who's got the best this and that and the other. You need to ask the question, what is it that we can give birth to that we couldn't do alone, that the financial world of tomorrow needs? And in 40 years of marriage, of course, the purpose of the partnership changes many times. And if the partners cannot change as the purpose changes, then the partnership ends. Yeah? Why are we a team? What do we need to focus on? Then we can ask, how do we need to be to fulfill that what, to fulfill the why? But then we can do all those 3, but if we're not doing the 4th one, we're not creating any value. We only create value not when we're in team meetings talking to each other. That's preparing the ground. The rest of the week, when we're not together, when we're out there representing the whole team, engaging our stakeholders, right? The connecting. And by the way, in the 250 teams we have done questionnaires on, in 90%, the lowest score is the 5th discipline, core learning. And that is worrying, right? By some way. Why? Because if we do the 4 and we are not growing our collective capacity as a team, if we are not a learning team, then we're becoming better and better at playing yesterday's game rather than growing our capacity and future fitness to play tomorrow's game. And just to say, please, all of you who run base coach trainings, I'm now arguing that every coach training in the primary training needs to teach supervision and team coaching. Right? Why? Well, supervision, because supervision isn't done by the supervisor. We need to train proactive supervisees. Secondly, every coach who works in organizations, sooner or later will find that the most common issue that gets brought by team leaders is, how do I develop my team? So even if you just do individual coaching, you end up supervising team coaching. Does that make sense? Because most team coaching is done by team leaders, not by professional coaches. So you better learn supervision and team coaching in your primary training and deliver it in your primary training. And in the book, Leadership Team Coaching, I talk about this journey, how we have to get every team leader, every team in the organization to go from team manager trying to manage all the parts, to team leader clear about the collective, to team orchestrator who can manage the connections inside and outside, to the team coach who knows how to coach their own team and grow the collective capacity to do more at higher quality, often with less resource. And 6, and most importantly, in the book we do a whole chapter on how do we appropriately, not through big campaigning, how do we surface the ecological awareness and consciousness in every coaching conversation. Not how do we bring it in, leaving out anything we've got about campaigning outside the door, but how do we, from the word go, ask the question, who does your work serve? And how is your work connected to the wider ecology? Just by asking the question. If we don't ask it at the beginning, we will be colluding with willful blindness, right? Because we'll be leaving it outside the door, or pretending it's outside the door. How do we think consciously about how it's present in our room? I was talking to Jackie, where's Jackie? About how we just moved to, Jackie, just moved to Dorset, right? And how when the people come into your room, you stop at the window and say, what does that put you in touch with? As you look out, she has, like me, the privilege of living in a beautiful place with a beautiful view from the window, looking out over sheep and fields. What does that put you in touch with? So just in that one moment, Jackie is connecting her clients with the more than human world. And you can do the same at the top of Canary Wharf Towers, right? It's probably not quite so attractive, but you still can do the same. How do we use the view from the window? How do we bring the ecology in through objects, flowers? We do more and more. I run these coaching retreats every year. We do a lot of coaching, walking side by side through woodlands. And we're not looking at what we can do for the ecology. We're also looking at how do we get the ecology to do a lot of the coaching? How do the trees do the coaching? We write in the book people who use horses. How do we help how do we ask the more than human world for the help we need to shift our consciousness? In the book I've just finished with my wife, we also look at how do we deal with the willful blindness? What's the cycle to actually face our own denial, our own disavowal? How do we work through the overwhelm if we really face up to what's happening in the world? How do we face the feelings of some people go straight to anger and blame? Oh, well, it's all their fault. Yeah. Or go to grief, pain, and trauma, or guilt and shame. And how do we move through all those stages to helping a person feeling what Antonio Gramsci, the great Italian communist, one of my favorite quotes from Italy. Yes? Do you know Antonio Gramsci? Yeah. Who he said we must proceed with optimism of the will coupled with pessimism of the intellect. Yeah? Great. I can't do it in Italian, but... So we talk about all sorts of strategies that you can do. And there is, by the way, and I'll make these available, all these slides, there is a Google Doc you can go on. There's an open letter to the coaching profession. And I would really like you to encourage as many of you who feel able to go and sign that letter, right? So it starts to go viral. And we're taking it back to all our contacts. Because it's saying, how do we start to not only have an EMCC ecological policy, but how do we have that for every coaching business, right down to the individual one-person business? And what is it we can do? These are some of the things we say in that letter you can do personally. So I have my own ecological policy, which limits what I can do in terms of global travel. I will only do long haul now if I can guarantee that I will impact at least 10,000 people the other end of the global journey. I will not do one-off keynotes that I get invited to. I've been training myself for 2 years on how to do experiential, intimate, engaged keynotes virtually, right? It takes a lot of practice, but we all need to do it. We need to stop flying to do keynotes. And what can the trainings do? I was talking to Ritza last night saying, we need to change all our competencies to these, right? All our who's doing competencies in the EMCC? right? We need to make sure ecological awareness is one of the competencies. We need to make sure all the training bodies are covering it in their training. Yeah? We shouldn't have a conference which doesn't have this as part of the conference. We should look at how do we reduce the carbon cost of every conference we do. Yes? But I think what's more important is that we learn the skills of helping all the people we impact get beyond willful blindness without doing it from knowing better or knowing first. How do we do it? Through awareness and partnership, not through campaigning. So what could you each do in terms of action today? Ensure that coach training is systemic, stakeholder-centric, and focused on how do we deliver value beyond the individual coachees. Teach supervision and how to be a proactive supervisee in all basic trainings. Include systemic team coaching in all basic executive coach trainings. What I said earlier. And let me just give you one thing to take away, and I'll just then come back to the questions. You see, I realized, the privilege I've had, I've been trained as a psychotherapist, teaching psychotherapy, trained in supervision, trained in coaching. I've learned a lot about how to be really empathic with the people in the room with me. Individuals, groups, teams. Yes? But what I've discovered is that there's a shadow side to that deep, resonant empathy. And that is, after a while I've been listening to you, I start to see the world through your eyes. I start to hear about your toxic organization. Do any of you hear about toxic organizations? I hear about the toxic bosses, the persecuting organization. And sooner or later, right, I hear your story as reality, not just your story. And I start to picture these awful people out there. And I start to see you as victim, them as persecutors, as me as rescuer. The classic drama triangle, right? Rather than realizing that by doing that, I am increasing my client's powerlessness. Every moment I do that, I'm increasing their victimhood. Yeah? So now I realized, about 5 years ago, and I wrote this in this little book, The Heart of Coaching Supervision, we have to develop wide-angled empathy. This is the ability to have as much empathy for everyone and every institution in your story as I do for you. This is really difficult for coaches. Why? Because so many of us are what I describe as organizational refugees, right? Many external coaches are organizational refugees. We love people, but we've fallen out of love with organizations. Yes, do you recognize that, any of you? Yeah. So now we have to practice wide-angle empathy. And so here's my challenge that I want to leave you with. Right? It's called the Wide-Angle Empathy Challenge. Every night, you can start tonight. When you go to watch the news, you put on your stopwatch on your mobile phone, you start it, and you time how long you can watch that news before you become judgmental, reactive. How long can you stay in wide-angled empathy and compassion for every individual, yes, including him, and her, and him, yeah, all your pet hates, and not only every individual, but every organization that gets featured on that news. So please, if you get more than 5 minutes, 20 seconds, which is my personal record, after quite a few years practice, please send me an email and tell me what spiritual and mindfulness practices you are doing, because I want to learn from you. Because we all need to grow our capacity to stay non-reactive in the midst of a more complex world in which we know more and more and we are overwhelmed by. And let me just mention the link to mental health, because someone asked about mental health. In that book, not the one on the table, but the what's mentioned out there, the integrative psychotherapy, I do try to address the question, how come in a world that statistically is richer, safer, and healthier than ever in human history, mental health is growing so fast? And I look at three big reasons, one of which is the fragmentation of our psychological containers, right? We create our identity not inside us, but through our psychological containers. First of all, our family, our extended family, both of which have got very fragmented and scattered. Through our community, which may now be all around the world. We don't even know the people next door to us. Through our relationship with the more than human world in the place that parents us. I was saying last night, most of us now are indigenous orphans. We are no longer parented by a place. The other psychological containers are our daily rhythms, our weekly rhythms, and our annual festivals. Most of those have become fragmented. You know, when I was young, you couldn't go to the pub or do shopping on Sunday. My family, you couldn't even play cards, because I had a very strict grandmother, right? Now we've lost that sense of the shape of the week, the shape of the day, the shape of the year, right? We are bombarded by unconnected data. And I was saying coaching so often now is becoming a psychological container oasis. But we need to help our clients look at how they build their psychological containers, right, to stay healthy. How do they build? We were talking about watering holes at work, where we meet like the animals do in the jungle. How do we build those places? Because identity is not within us. It's shaped between us. And that way, we also have to, with this optimism in the world and pessimism in the intellect, let me end with one of my favorite quotes. So we started with Mevlana Rumi from the 13th century. We'll end with a modern spiritual teacher, Ram Dass. He said, "It's amazing how many of us have signed up at the school of life and then spend the rest of our lives complaining about the curriculum." We have all signed up at the school of life. How do we, in coaching, remember that our best teacher is our most problematic client? How do we help our clients realize that that boss who is so awful has actually come as a gift as their next teacher? And I added a line very arrogantly to Ram Dass. I said, remember in life, right, there are always endless resets. What you fail to learn in one marriage, one role, one place, life will generously give you the same lesson with the next client, the next role, the next team. So if you want to save very expensive legal fees, learn it now rather than repeat the lesson next year. We've run out of time. I have promised, with my arm up my back, that any questions that you've logged in through this system, I will do a Q&A on and come back for the follow-ups. And just to say, there are some of the books outside, but in the break, I will sign, I brought a few of the other books, and I will sell them at author's discount with no added cost for the signature. I want to thank you for being here, but I really want to thank you for the difference that you can make in our much challenged world. And I want to leave you with a sense that individually, we can probably all double the beneficial impact we are having in the world if we start to work in partnership and we start to extend how we're working. But collectively, we can magnify the impact we're having. And that's why I couldn't refuse this invitation to come and support my good friend Ritza in the work that you're all doing at EMCC. Collectively, we can quadruple and even more the collective impact we're having, and to remember that we're not just in the coaching industry, but along with psychotherapy, along with organizational consultancy, along with spiritual mindfulness, we are all part of a much bigger calling. And that is to shift human consciousness so we are fit to live on this planet. Thank you, the difference you're going to make, and thank you for being here.